You're live with BBC News now. As promised, joining me here in the studio is the Israeli ambassador to London, Tzipi Hotovely. Thank you, Ambassador, so much for joining us here on BBC News. It is almost 3 weeks now since the October the 7th attacks. Just give me a sense of where you are now, 3 weeks on.
This is the most shocking attack ever happened in Israel. And unfortunately, the atrocities being exposed slowly, and the world just this week, we exposed to all the journalists serving in Israel and reporting on this war, the horrific documenting that Hamas created for its own atrocities. So I must say some of the journalists just couldn't watch it. It was so horrific. So all those debates about whether babies being burned or being beheaded, this is the situation, and we have the videos documenting all those atrocities against children, war crimes that Hamas committed against innocent people, and this is now our time to protect ourselves.
I spoke at length to one of the journalists who was there, and you're exactly right. Other journalists had their head in their hands when they were watching it. He gave graphic, horrifying accounts of what he saw in those videos, so there is no question about that. What Hamas did, every detail is horrific, but the majority of people that have been killed in the Israeli response have not been Hamas. They have been civilians.
I have a very clear answer for that. Whoever loses his life in the Gaza Strip, after Israel gave the opportunity for everyone, every civilian, every woman, every child, every man to go to a safe shelter in the south area of Gaza, Israel is now making sure that the south will be a safe place while the north is being under Israeli attack in order to dismantle Hamas capabilities. So whoever didn't go there because Hamas prevented it, this is Hamas to be blamed for every loss of life in the Gaza Strip. And, I've been watching the BBC, I've been watching the cover, and I have a question. You, not yourself, your colleagues, you interview senior people at Hamas. Why you don't address them with these questions? You should ask Hamas, wait a second, why are you preventing your population to get humanitarian aid? Why are you preventing them to go to a safe place?
Questioned those people from that side and from senior officials talking to us and giving their response. But you have constantly said you're not targeting civilians. We're not
targeting civilians.
You have constantly said you're minimising casualties. You see the pictures, you see the numbers, you see the details, the accounts from doctors. At what point do you reassess at all whether what you're saying is effectively what is happening on the ground?
So, Matthew, I think you're a journalist long enough to know how wars look like. So when the Americans wanted to make sure ISIS won't commit his horrible crimes against Muslims, not just against Western people, the millions of Muslims being slaughtered by ISIS, Americans had to fight back for a long time in order to make it clear, and many civilians got killed and got caught in a crossfire.
I'm simply asking you as you watch. Does there come a point where you have to make a reassessment given the amount of civilians that are dying?
So my answer is, since we gave them the opportunity to have a safe place, they don't have to be there. They can be in a different place. We want to protect our children.
You said the south was safe.
Yes.
They should move from the north.
Yes.
We have seen bombings in the south, people dying in the south. The UN saying nowhere in the Gaza Strip is safe.
Well, it's totally not correct. There is a difference between the northern area of Gaza and the southern area of Gaza. But I want to make another thing clear.
But to just make
I want to be clear about what Israel is doing.
Yes, on that specific point about being safe in the south, it is not, because there have been bombings around Khan Yunis and other places. There have been many, many deaths, and people even saying, I've moved south, like the Israelis have told me. They're now bombing there, so perhaps I should move back up north. That is partly what is happening.
I highly recommend to people not to be in the north, because this is where we bomb, and we actually send alerts, something that no army in the world is doing. So we are targeting only the military targets. But look at the problem, and I think this is where we all need to be together, fighting Hamas and giving Israel the support, because Hamas is embedded in hospitals. Hamas is embedded in schools. Hamas is stealing fuel that, this underground terrority that Hamas is hiding inside, those terrorists, they're giving themselves a safe shelter that takes liters of fuel in order to preserve light, preserve the air condition inside. All those
Even
things
Hamas
is doing just in order to prevent his own people
the UN
to get
has said that Hamas has not stolen fuel from the US.
Seriously, so how do you think this underground terrority is functioning? They're dealing with fuel. We just saw a satellite documentary from IDF that shows clearly there is 500,000 of liters. We showed that in the news. 500,000 liters in Gaza used by Hamas. He's preventing it from the population. So I think whatever claims you have, blame Hamas and ask Hamas, because they're in charge of preventing from their population and they're using them as human shields. I think this is where we need to be together. Why to use them as human shields?
I'll come back to human shields and the hostages, which is absolutely critical in a moment or two. Just a quick couple of questions for you to answer, because there's a lot of territory to actually get through. On the issue of a ceasefire, where is Israel?
So Israel has a mission here to protect the southern border. As we saw, the 7th of October, our southern border was not protected, and children, women and men slaughtered by Hamas. So
I understand,
we need to
and we
protect
acknowledge
them.
that right at the start. So I'm simply asking a question, yes or no on ceasefire?
No. And it's a clear no with N and O, because we need to make sure that Hamas capabilities will be dismantled. At the same time, we call to immediate release of 229 people that are there. This is a war crime. They should release them.
I promise you that. So Martin Griffiths saying a little earlier, there are rules of war. They're clear. Civilians must be protected and have the essentials to survive wherever they are and whether they choose to move or stay. You've failed on both counts. You've imposed a siege. You're ordering a population to move. You failed on both of those counts that Martin Griffiths is talking about.
So just to make things clear, over 100,000 Israelis had to evacuate from their homes. So are we committing those things to our own people? What we're trying to say, this is a war. I think people don't get it. This is a war that Hamas started, and Israel at the moment evacuated over 100,000.
As Martin Griffiths is saying,
we go according to the international law. We're going according to the international law. The international law is very clear. When you are in a war, you don't need to supply to your enemy. This is the very basic law. But we still allow, because we believe the population in Gaza should have their supplies, water, medicine, food. Israel allows to come into the Gaza Strip.
I've used that quote already about crumbs, because it is only
even endangering the people of Gaza by the fact that Hamas is rocketing, still firing. As we speak today, Tel Aviv was hit by rockets. So think about it. And this is.
We showed the pictures. We had our correspondents reporting from there.
I'm not saying you didn't.
And the injuries.
But can you ask yourself one question? In order to fire so many rockets, over 6,000 rockets being fired in the last 3 weeks, non-stop fire rockets on Israel, it needs fuel. It needs electricity. Where is it coming from? If the crisis is so big, Hamas could have supplied the same fuel they're using to their military machine to their population, but they're not doing it.
Let me ask you about the hostages, because there were some latest reports of the negotiations behind the scenes. Can I simply ask you, I know it's only happened in the last few minutes, but have you heard any update about any movement?
I know that they're trying very hard. I know that this is a government's priority to bring these innocent people back home that Hamas is keeping hostage. And we are using the international community as international demand. They need to be back home now and immediately. I know the Qatar involvement, but I must say most of the things are confidential. So
sure, I understand that. And there is Qatari
involvement,
and it is crucial. I was speaking only a few days ago to a former military attaché, a former Qatari intelligence officer, who was saying that he was hopeful there could be movement on hostages, perhaps a larger number. But everything that Israel was doing currently was making it more difficult. You had a poll also in one of the Israeli newspapers today saying, in terms of the public, now half the population, half Israelis, think you should pause the consideration of a ground offensive whilst you look at the hostage situation and try to sort that out.
It's very obvious. Israelis, their heart goes to the hostages. I'm a mother, and everyone who's a father or a mother or anyone thinking about the grandmothers there, the children there, the babies there. We were hosting this week a delegation of the hostages' families. And you see and you hear these people for 3 weeks not getting even one sign of a life. Well, they're asking humanitarian aid from Israel. They forget to bring a Red Cross delegation to check what's their condition.
Will you
so
give
we don't
space,
even know
though?
this.
Will you give space? Because there are so many indications about the potential ground war. Benjamin Netanyahu repeating that only in the last 48 hours. Will you give space for further negotiations potentially on this area of hostages?
I think this is the government's duty and responsibility to bring back these hostages, and I know the government is making all its efforts to make sure that these innocent people will be back home, and I'm happy that the international community is supporting this demand to bring them home immediately. This is as simple as that.
In terms of the international community, we heard Joe Biden, when he was in Israel, talking about not acting in rage. I was speaking last week to peace activists in Jerusalem who warned, as victims, Israel here, they had to safeguard themselves from losing their principles. Are you listening to all of those warnings in terms of what you consider to do next?
First of all, we work very, very closely, as you know, with our allies. So we work closely with the UK government, we work closely with the American administration.
But you know the thrust of what I'm asking you, in
yes,
terms of the
course.
wider
So
dangers of this going.
So I will give you the
wider
answer. The answer is, again, goes back to safety and security. The first obligation of every government in the world, and I'm sure it would have been the case, it was UK being attacked by ISIS on your doorstep. If you were attacked by ISIS on your doorstep, you would have done the same thing. You would have dismantled ISIS abilities. This is what we are facing, and this is why we must do that. 9 million Israelis are looking at the Prime Minister and asking him one thing: defend our children so the 7th of October will never repeat again. In order to do that, we must dismantle Hamas capabilities, because Hamas is not having any political horizon to the region. It wants just one thing: prevent peace, and Jews won't exist according to Hamas charter. This is what Hamas wants.
I've only got 30 seconds left, so this has to be brief. Do you think you can wipe out Hamas? So many people think that is an impossibility in reality.
We cannot wipe out ideology, we can wipe out capabilities. This is what we're doing, because we don't want anyone to be able to kill innocent children again.
Ambassador, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us here
at
BBC News.